Hello, I'm Rory Smith. Before listening to this episode, please be aware it comes with a content warning. This episode is for adults only. It includes conversations around child abuse, child sexual abuse, child trafficking, violence, and other mature themes that some people may find disturbing and or triggering. This message is to empower you with the knowledge you need to make healthy decisions about how and if you should consume the content in this episode. Before listening, please read the episode description. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, welcome to Be My Guest with me, Rory Smith. Today's conversation on child sex trafficking and child sex abuse is tough. It's harrowing, and at times it's even disturbing. But it's really, really important to share. My platform isn't just about overcoming adversity or all these positive lessons that we can take from other people's experiences. It's also about joining the fight for causes and doing my tiny, tiny bit in helping people to shine a very bright torch on the darkest corners of society. We need to open our eyes to what's potentially happening around us, in our institutions, in our communities, and even in our own homes. Child sex trafficking is fueled by greed and power, and we need to stop burying our heads in the sand as if it only happens in documentaries. It doesn't. It's unfortunately happening all around us. And although we can hear the conversation around it becoming a little bit louder, we need to bang on those doors as loudly as we can and reveal what's happening behind them. And it's through people like Anneke bravely sharing her story that's going towards handing that power to the victims and the survivors and stripping it from the perpetrators. You were born in Belgium in the early 60s.
Yes.
Your mum, who wasn't very well at the time, married your stepfather when you were around 3 years old.
That's correct.
And you all moved to Flanders.
That's right.
So, as a young child, how would you describe your personality?
Well, as a very young child, as a baby, and you can even see that in the photos, I had a caretaker in Brussels and who was French speaking. My mother was Flemish, but this French speaking caretaker loved me. And so I was actually extremely outgoing. I was quite, bossy actually as a little girl. The pictures. I actually remember walking the dog and, controlling the dog. It was a little dog. But I know that even my grandparents were also my mother, who was single, her stepmother and her father and her brothers were all very happy to have me around, and I was very happy to be with them, even though it's not a perfect family for sure, but there was love from this caretaker and this stepmother of my mother, my grandmother.
Mm-hmm. And things began to change for you when you were introduced to your mother's cleaner and her husband. Tell me how.
Yeah, so we moved to Flanders, and when I was 3, and then I learned Flemish because I still spoke French, and even though my mother's family obviously were Flemish, they were actually speaking French with me because they thought it was so cute. And so in Flanders, I lost that caretaker. And my stepfather was very focused on his child. That was my brother that was born 9 months after their marriage. And they were very, he was very distant from me. And my mother, I think, was targeted. And this cleaning lady, came to work for us. And immediately I didn't like her. And immediately she started offering to my mother, who was now busy with my little brother, to take me off her hands and to take me along with her and her husband. And then I found myself with them and didn't like either of them. There were always lots of children, and I never got close to any. They were from Holland, so they had Dutch children and Belgian children. They said they were all their nieces and nephews, and I didn't have any reason to question any of that, of course. I didn't know, but the children always changed. And so, yes, that I spent quite a lot of time with them against my will. And then I've spoken about that. They taught me how to swim. You know, they did things that my parents, they didn't really, we never went on an outing with my family. So they did things with me.
Mm-hmm. And this is what you later came to realize was actually a grooming process.
Yes. And I would say they were rather grooming my parents, because I didn't like them to begin with, and I never did. But they were, and I don't know where the other children came from, to tell you the truth, but they just took me enough times, I guess, that I wasn't coming home complaining until about a year later. And then, and then it was too late and no one believed me.
What happened a year later?
Well, first of all, the husband raped me when I was 6, or just maybe still 5, or maybe just 6. It was just around my birthday. And that was extremely traumatizing. And I believe it was just before, or it was even the same weekend, I'm not sure. But then they took me to something from the network. And that was, the first event was just this horrible masked ball, actually, in a castle somewhere in Belgium. And it was not just me. I wasn't the only child. There were 2 other girls that were with me. And so it was the couple going in with 3 girls. And I don't know what happened to the other girls. But I was horribly abused.
Were there other children there apart from the 3 girls?
Well, at the event, at the ball, I didn't see any children. First, the person who was greeting us at the door, and then it was, I don't think the woman came in. I think it was just the husband. Her husband came in with the 3 girls. He was disappointed that they didn't bring any boys. And my hair was short. And so to him, I looked enough like a boy. So the first experience was that I was actually raped by this man in a private room. And after that, there was some spectacle together with, I was on a stage together with the husband who he was naked as well, and so was I. And he had me on a leash, collar a leash, and he was ordering me around. And he had me do things that were extremely degrading. And at the same time, the mass ball, I didn't realize what was happening, because we were clearly in a castle, but everybody was dressed like hippies. Jimi Hendrix was playing. The music was all, the hippie music. It was 1969. And I didn't realize that it was a mass ball. These were not real hippies. They were aristocrats that were dressed as hippies. So it was very incongruous in that we were in a castle, and there were also waiters going around with silver platters, and on these silver platters were all kinds of drugs, not just drinks. There were platters just full of drugs that were being offered to the people there. And so everybody was so high that even though this was happening, this is the most humiliating experience, nobody really noticed. I mean, it was as if it was a sideshow or something. It was not so important.
Do you remember roughly how many people were there?
There were quite a few people there. So I only saw adults, and there must have been, goodness, felt like it was a large salon, like maybe a ballroom, and it was full. Must have been like 40 people or something.
Wow. And the rape happened in private. The stage, was that in public view of those around 40 people?
Yes, that was public. That was a stage. It was a low black stage, yes, with all these people around.
As a child, I would imagine that you don't even have the words for how that makes you feel.
That's exactly right. But I did know one thing. Right after it happened, I was just left to lie on the stage. I did know something, that I had this very strong sense that if I don't do something, I'm going to die. And it was clear that I wasn't maybe physically going to die, but my spirit would die. So I did stand up, and I actually chewed out the crowd. I told them that they couldn't do this, and I was going to make sure they were all going to go to jail. And that, when I stood up, I just felt some strength enter me, and I felt like I was helped in a way. I don't know, but that's what it felt like. And yet still nobody really paid notice.
Were there consequences to that?
Well, yes. So the person that had let us in and then had raped me before, he and I don't remember. I can't remember how we got from one place to another. If it was the same castle or if it was another place that we went to, I can't remember that. But I just remember that he took me aside and then took me along to what was a large vaulted basement. And it was one room after the next. We were walking through these large, empty rooms in this cave. And I knew something was happening, but he was acting very, very relaxed. Like, there's no problem at all. And he was saying, we like you, we don't want to lose you. And then, yes, I was at the end, the last room, there was a bath. And it was like built in or something. It was a cement bath, I believe, or I'm not sure. But behind the bath, he showed me what was a body of a young woman. And he was just very casually telling me that they just didn't want anything to happen to me because they liked me, and I just should just not speak out. I just shouldn't say anything.
Did them telling you that they liked you feel as a 6-year-old like love?
No, I didn't like him, and I thought, well, he's, I didn't like this person, so I felt, it didn't feel like love, but it did feel, I was attuning myself to his vibe of nonchalance and, just being on his wavelength. I guess I try to get on his wavelength.
So you didn't tell the cleaning lady or her husband because I'd assume that they're the ones to bring you back home. Would that be right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you obviously wouldn't have discussed it with them, and then you're back home and you have this fear built in not to speak about it to anyone else. But I know that over time then, your mother actually took over and she became the one to take you to the castle.
Yes, well, actually, I tried to tell anyway. I tried to tell my mother.
Mm.
In my mind, I had said I was, because my stepfather was the mayor of the village, and I had told them that I was going to tell my father and he was going to make sure they all went to jail. That's what I had said specifically. So I thought, well, I can't tell him, but I can tell my mother. So, like you said earlier, I had no words to describe, but I did say that bad things had happened. And then my mother, first of all, sent me back anyway, but I think she realized that something was happening and then ended up taking over, indeed. And I have no idea how that happened, but I do remember her getting a driver's license and being all excited about getting a car, which she needed to take me to various places, not just castles, but bars, individual houses for, just with one person, anything at all.
What was she getting out of it?
Well, I found out later that she was paid, although we were not poor, so obviously that wasn't the reason. But when you said she's not well, she never was. She's definitely mentally ill, but never diagnosed.
Did that make you feel, because your parents are supposed to protect you against everything, and if your mother isn't the one to protect you, as a child I would imagine that feels that no one's there to protect me. And that would that mean that translates as a child that there's something wrong with you?
Very much. Very much. I always felt something was wrong with me. Although I did have a basis, I guess, for self-esteem through the love that I'd had received from the caretaker. And then I did feel that I was getting help somehow from non-humans. I was just getting spiritual help. Sometimes I got, a message, or I just felt support. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes there was some clarification, or I was put in a state where things didn't affect me the same way, and something crystallized, something became clear, and so various things happened over the years to let me know, I guess, that I was there was support, there was help. But yes, my mother always made me feel that I was wrong and that there was something wrong with me, and that was everything. I was to my mother. I was crazy, I was a liar, I was many things. I was never just right, and I could never be me around her either. It was extremely difficult to be in my mother's presence because it was all her projection. There was nothing allowed of myself.
When you were 9 years old, you were sent in a car to Switzerland. Can you share with me what happened there?
Yes, I used to think that was Switzerland, but I'm actually not so sure anymore. But
okay.
There was, I was basically given, and this is around the Bilderberg meeting that happened in Belgium in 1972 when I was 9 years old. So I know that, I knew there was something with Switzerland, but I was thinking most people there were Belgians, so I'm not sure if it happened in Switzerland. And I know it was around the Bilderberg meeting, which is around this time, actually, late April in 1972. So what was done is, like, the Belgians, they had been using me, for anything and everything, mostly for blackmail, when people were getting into the network, So there was a politician who was at the head of this, that I saw was the head of this network. I believe that he wasn't the top, maybe, but he was the one that I saw as the big boss. And he was using me and other children to basically what was called the newcomers, so that these men would end up with a child and in bed, and then they would be filmed or photographed, and then that would be used as blackmail, and then so this power system was held in place that way. So I was mostly used for that, or for crazy things like I described, that had to do usually with aristocrats who were part of this network as well. And yes, at 9 years old, I was given together with a younger boy, and we were, so there was as far as I know, that Belgian politician, he was not a Satanist. He didn't believe in anything, but he wanted to stage a satanic ritual to please someone who was internationally important and a billionaire. And so he staged a satanic ritual, and I was there with that boy, and you know, it's this is hard to talk about because I felt extremely protective of this little boy. His name was Wouter. He was Flemish, and he was a little slow. So he was 7, I was 9, but he was younger than that, and he was very innocent. And I loved him so much. I just wanted to protect his innocence. I'd do anything. And
Please only share if you're comfortable too, Anneke.
Oh, thank you. He was sacrificed. And I was raped. That's why there were 2 children. And then the rapist, the guest of honor, you could say, ended up miraculously taking an interest in me, and that changed everything for me.
This was the American man?
Yes.
Yeah. He then took you to America for, was it around 3 weeks?
Yes, I think I was in the United States for about a month, so he didn't take me right away. There were a few things that happened before. I was flown probably end of June, beginning of July, and I stayed the month of July of 1972. I spent in the United States, and I spent quite a lot of time with him in his own homes, but I also spent some time in a family near DC where I was literally parked for about a week, maybe a little longer. So these people took care of me then. But yes, I did spend quite a lot of time with him.
Was he a public figure?
Yes.
Why did no one question him taking a young girl from Europe back to America?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because he took me shopping to Madison Avenue. So he was, I had no idea. I felt I found a father in reality. So there's just a lot of dissociation, and it was, he was giving me attention that I'd never received. He was reflecting parts of me that I didn't know existed. My mother never saw anything of me, but he saw things that were very unique to me, and then reflected them back. So I was growing emotionally, but what he was really doing was doing a triage, how he could best use me in the network that he was a part of. So I felt great. It wasn't all great. It was as if I'd found maybe an incestuous father. There was a lot of sexual abuse, and it was all also training, weirdly, even though it was clear that he really loved doing this. And yes, he's a billionaire, and we went. He took me shopping in a clothing store for children on Madison Avenue, and so the staff was just thrilled to serve him, and no one seemed to even have. I never even saw any kind of like glimpse from anyone, that was a little like questioning this.
Wow. How did he introduce you to people?
So the only time that he introduced me was to his staff. He had a home in New York City, and he introduced me to his staff as his niece from Paris.
Wow.
Yeah.
And no one questioned it.
No. In fact, no. But this is really crazy, though. The staff, I think they were themselves mind controlled because they came into the bedroom. This maid. There was. I just saw a butler and a maid, and the maid came in the bedroom in the morning, and so did the butler. When I was literally in bed with this man, and they pretended everything was hunky dory.
Wow. So completely complicit in all of it.
Yeah.
Gosh. How did that end then after the 3 weeks? Where were you sent to after that?
So then I was sent to Switzerland. So maybe that's where I previously got confused. But I was flown back on his private jet. And I just have to tell you also that I was flown in on his private jet.
Mm-hmm.
I never went through customs, just to be clear. I was flown into JFK, and I was picked up by a handler. I was driven right off the tarmac, straight to a hotel, walked through a crowded lobby, put in a hotel room for an hour or so. So all of this happened, I can't explain it, but I did not go through customs. So same on the way back. I was flown in his private jet from Maine, where we had gone, and flown to Switzerland. And there I was picked up by the boss of the Belgian network, and then basically he drove me. There was a stop in Switzerland there why I was probably flown there. It was a very small airport, I remember that. And I went to someplace near there. There was programming that happened. There was some medical things that were apparently done. I'm not sure what it was, but he drove me to Germany, to Heidelberg, and then I was there in a house quite close to the castle of Heidelberg, and a large villa, actually extremely, very strange because it's very. There are a lot of houses there, but this villa, you cannot reach it. I was there last summer, and it is very well protected. So it's a large villa with large grounds, but you cannot get on the estate, or you cannot see anything that happens there. And so in that large villa, that was set up for mind control training. And I wasn't the only child there, but I was definitely the oldest child at 9. And the person in charge there was someone I recognized later. His name was Hans Harmsen. He's a former Nazi, or I guess he always remained one. And he was not always there, but he was clearly the man in charge. And then I was trained by mostly young men that were handlers, called handlers in the network.
How long were you there for?
That was the month of August, 1972.
Where was your family in all of this?
Yeah, so my family, the biggest thing of the year was our family holiday every summer. And that summer, they went to Tyrol no questions asked. My mother, the way in which my mother was not part of the network but was selling me, she never knew what happened or what would happen. I don't think she was informed very much. I think she was informed a little bit once in a while, but obviously not too much. I think her eagerness to belong and to brag about the important people that I was frequenting, I think, was enough reason to keep her at a distance for them, you know. So she never really got into the network. But yes, she wouldn't know if I was going to come back or not. And I came back after 2 months. And she said something, it was interesting. She said something extremely vague, which is how she was. She said, well, you know, it wasn't the best holiday. And I was to understand that she'd missed me or something, you know, something of that, something like that. It wasn't the best holiday. So that was as close as she could get, I think. It was just letting me know that it had been a long time.
Wow. And did she ever ask what happened to you? Did you tell her about America? Did she even know you were in America?
No, she didn't know anything. The only thing that she did find out somehow, because in this triage, when he was spending time with me alone, he was figuring out what I could best do for the network. And he had clearly decided that I should be a singer-actress. And so I was getting trained for that. And the mind control was all for that. I was going to be a famous singer-actress in France. And that way, I would be a better slave for the network, because I would be basically prostituted out to the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world. And then I could not only be sold to them, I could also spy on them. And that was the idea.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy, yeah?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until you were 10 years old, and this is when you were introduced to a 20-year-old man, which is considerably younger than most of the people within the network. Tell me about him.
Yes, but I'll first tell you that for my mother, as far as what she found out, she heard something that I was going to be famous or something, because her attitude changed a little bit towards me, and that she went from, she had never looked up to me before, and suddenly she started sort of thinking of me as a future star, and there was this excitement in her. It was a little weird, but that changed. And she also sent me to music school, and I remember, you know, practicing and everything. So there was a lot that happened that whole year that had to do with that training, and it ended when I just wouldn't go along anymore, because when you are being trained to be in the network, because the first years I was, you could say, a throwaway child, so it didn't matter what happened. But once you are being targeted to be inside the network and to become part of the network of this particular group of people that want to keep the power, you have to go along with what they do.
How did that feel, if, because you're inside the network, but then there are times when you're outside of it and you're spending time with other children and other people, was it a feeling of almost indoctrination, that you felt almost powerful that you were part of the network, or was it full of shame that you were part of the network?
No, exactly. That's a great question, because the first years I felt such shame because I was not valued in any way. And it was clear that, you know, and I was just getting all these negative projections from all these people that I was worthless. And so the shame was so great that was what dissociated me. And I was called a whore the whole time. So the shame was really the greatest barrier to knowing what was happening in the nights and weekends, so that I could go to school not having any idea what was really happening. But once I was, picked out, you could say, to be part of it, suddenly I was getting a lot of praise, and in fact, the respect that I was receiving, it's not real respect, of course, but it felt like that to me. That really was the hook for me, that there's a lot of, it's hard to talk about these things because there's so much dissociation, which is part of the mind control training, is that you are traumatized to a point, you're tortured, and then you get tortured, and you reach a state where you don't know anything anymore from the pain. Your survival instinct gets you into a place where you're completely, it's like you become a blank. And then that state is filled in that moment. And these instinctual responses to life threat, that which what trauma is, are used then to, they're very, very good at what they do. That's all I can tell you, that the programmation was very thought out. There was no experimentation happening. It was extremely thought out, and I was impressed myself and how much I was changing. So after, but it also meant I had to go along with them, and you could say that something happened that wasn't meant to. I wasn't supposed to happen. That I was badly humiliated again, and that really, it's like the program was broken or something, and then I didn't want to go along anymore, and I rebelled, and that rebellion, from that rebellion, I was kicked out, you could say, from the core of the international network, and I ended up being sent back to Belgium, where indeed soon after, just a few months later, I ran into this young man who was being brought there by his father, but who was already a gangster, and who was already known for being violent and getting respect in the Belgian network for his temper or something, or for the fact that he had a gun and would use it. And he then took an interest, and that is really the subject of my book. That my book starts at basically the meeting with this young man, and it's the last year in the network, where he becomes like one of the protectors and then worst abusers, but then eventually makes a deal to get me out of the network, which is what happened.
Tell me about that, if you wish to share that, and are in a space to do so. How did you finally escape?
So that year that he, first he was protecting me in that he wouldn't let anyone else touch me, and he didn't touch me either. So that was quite amazing. No, there was no sex for 6 months, and that was very healing. And then once it became sexual, it really, he went into some kind of, I don't know, he was also not very well mentally, for sure. And he ended up abusing me so badly. Yes. Very crazy and extreme and violent. And then, but eventually I was going to get killed because he dropped me, and I was to be killed in the network because of that, because he had dropped me, and he was complicit in that as well.
There was a the deal that you spoke about there was a deal between you and there was another girl involved.
Well, it was really a deal between the gangster and the boss of the network. So it was really a deal between them. And the deal was to get me out. But in order for me to be able to leave, they had to make sure that I would never want to speak of anything, and that I would keep the secret, and that I would feel guilty for life. So I was forced to you say the little girl. Yes, there was a little girl that I'd never seen before, but I had to kill her.
How old were you?
So I was 11. I had been trained to do this, by the way. It wouldn't have been my first murder. But the training, right from the beginning, made it very clear that if you refuse, it will be worse for the victim. So you're put in. So you're supposedly given the choice, but you understand very quickly there is no choice. There's just figuring out what is wanted from you. So I knew I had to do it, and I knew that I didn't want to do it. And so yes, I do describe that in the book, very detailed, how I got myself in that space, in that space of complete projection in order to be able to do it. And it was in a so after the gangster had a change of heart and then went to negotiate for my release, that was decided, and then they came and got me. But I had already been tortured, so I was already in bad shape. And I think that the idea was that I was going to die anyway, so that even though he saved my life and then went to work for this politician, in exchange for that was going to be, the left-hand man with a big debt to this politician, that I was going to die anyway. I think that was the idea. I did have a near-death experience.
So were you physically taken back home at that stage by someone in the network?
Yes, I had a near-death experience. I had to come back. The girl was dead. And then the same gangster drove me home and gave me instructions for life.
Which were
about prostitution, drugs, where I should go. So the first one was never become a prostitute, never sleep with anyone for money, never do it. It was about drugs, never buy drugs, never... it was very specific. It said you could take drugs if they're given to you, but never do anything to get them. So it was very clear in that sense. It was, you have to leave this country, you have to go to Paris, London, New York, and you have to find a husband. You have to find someone, not an older man who made his own fortune, but you have to find someone your age from a wealthy family, preferably a family of New York bankers. You can never speak of the network to anyone ever. You have to forget it, everything. You have to forget everyone you saw. You have to forget me. So these instructions were very precise. And they entered, in a very deep way. And I believe that they were sort of my subconscious guide for the years to come. And I did all these things. I even lived in all these 3 places. And of course, it also meant I had to be back home with my mother until I was old enough to leave. And, that was the direction, is to get out of there as soon as you could. So that meant at 15, 16, I started to leave. I was really not living at home anymore. 16, I moved out. 15, I was roaming a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I made my way. And then I also, well, there were things that were important to me that like education, that I was able to, accomplish something anyway.
Mm-hmm. And when you eventually escaped and you did live in all of these different places, France, London, Paris, and then eventually New York, is it because we often hear this with victims and survivors of abuse, that the memories sometimes aren't there, or sometimes the memories are locked away. Is it a choice to block the thoughts and feelings when they come up, or are they naturally blocked that you can't even remember them?
No, that's the dissociation. It's not something that you consciously ever do. So I was extremely dissociated, and we all have parts. I really love internal family systems, which is a healing modality that acknowledges that we all have parts. I never was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, though I think at some point I certainly could have been. I had blackouts, you could say, when I was much younger. But, in my 20s, I started to get flashbacks already, except I didn't have a context for them, and I couldn't believe it. Because there was what happened at the end when I went back home after being rescued from the network, and then I was back with my mother. At first, I knew everything. There was no, first of all, I was wounded, so I couldn't go to school. And I had to be home with my mother, knowing everything and looking at the scabs from the torture I had undergone. So I knew everything, but my mother completely denied everything, because anything that existed that would show that she was not a perfect mother didn't exist in her mind, and so didn't exist in her environment, and so I wasn't allowed to show that it existed. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's like my mother had her own totalitarian state of, you cannot disagree with what I believe, and I am a good mother, and that's the end of that. And anything that would show that I'm not the perfect mother just doesn't exist. So she pretended the scabs didn't exist, even though she was keeping me home. And I was a little rebellious at that time. So she really stepped up the pace until she eventually sexually abused me. Mm. Which then made me so ashamed that I went back into her narrative. That her narrative was that she was a good mother, and I could not live with the knowledge, with that awareness, mm-hmm. that she did that, and she was living with me. So she did it that one time, but it was sufficient to completely silence me. And then I had to believe that she was this person, mm-hmm. that she believed she was. And so I went back to believing that she was this nice mother, even though there were many signs that she wasn't. Mm-hmm. But that's how as a young adult, I believed she was this nice mother. And so nothing else existed that wasn't fitting in that image. Mm. So it was a very slow process. First I was becoming aware of sexual abuse, and then it was a very difficult process of her abuse. But there were things that were showing that her reactions to the sexual abuse were very strange. So as I was delving into, becoming aware of things that had happened and that made sense, that it was like the beginning of a huge puzzle, and just little puzzle pieces were falling into place, and things that I had remembered but did, now were making sense in this context if that had happened. Mm-hmm. So the process began really in the 80s when I went to therapy in Los Angeles, where I lived at the time, and then slowly to my mother. And then once I realized my mother was not at all what she pretended to be, then that really started to open the door to, eventually the Dutroux case in Belgium in 96 was giving me context for some of the flashbacks that I'd had. But then it still took a very long time before I could find a therapist that was open to even dealing with these things.
How do you, and I know this is a very, very broad question with probably very nuanced answers, but how do you get to that stage? Because you grew up believing that there was something inherently wrong with you. You were told by your mother something that you believed not to be true, but because she told you it so many times, you then believed it. And I would imagine you go through a stage of thinking, was it as bad as I thought, or did I just make it all up? Yeah. How do you get to the stage of going, actually, that's abuse?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's not that I believed something, it's just that something was true, and that this truth, there was no room for it at all. So her state of not accepting anything that was true because it went against her self-image, that was really, the totalitarian state. If you bring the truth out, if you speak the truth, there's going to be consequences, and obviously there were. So, and there's no limit to the consequences, in someone who cannot accept that they are, not as, somebody who believes they're perfect or they're a perfect mother. Well, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. But yes, of course, when a flashback first comes up, I didn't want to believe that. Nobody wants to believe these things are true, first of all. You just don't want to believe it's true. You don't want to believe you were horribly humiliated. You don't want to believe that this is actually you. The thing with shame is that you can't believe that's you. And then in the network, the programmation goes to you participate by being complicit. So you are made to do things. So then you can't believe that's you. So all of that gets dissociated from your mind. It's just because you cannot live with this idea that that is you, either the shame or the evil. And so the work of getting in touch with these things it's like doing an inquest into truth. And for me, of course I still have memories that come up, but there's also the attachment to the abusers. That's another thing, because that's the idea of love. So that gets put to the test when you have the idea of love, because as children we're going to attach anyway. That's why children are used, because in the network they say they're easy. Well, it's to say that they attach. So they love grown-up, they love their grown-ups. So that attachment has to be untangled. That's everyone's task, though. Everyone has to untangle the attachment of their childhood and just sort through what was helpful and true and what was not. But the memories is... First, I can't believe it. I've walked around when I had a memory going, just walking around for weeks saying, this is not possible. No. Because the image, especially of the network, the international network, you could say their image is quite the opposite of reality. So when you have these celebrities, which I was to become, so I ran into a few, you have an image of the celebrity and it's exactly the opposite of what that person is actually like. And they're so good at putting out the PR and the image of somebody that is going to just completely deceive you. And you get the biggest deception, though, I think, is that you have the idea that these people are emotionally mature, which they are absolutely not. And that's the biggest deception, and that's the biggest thing for me personally. These were authority figures for me. I loved these people, but they were authority figures for me. And then I go through a memory, and I feel disappointed in them. I thought they were better than that, but no, they were really not. They were really petty and small, and they were coming from an emotionally infantile place. And that is the biggest deception, I think. That we have these authority figures of the world stage, that I was supposed to be one of them, that are just not what they seem at all.
What feelings arise within you when you know what those people have done, but the performance is so charming, so likable?
Yes, exactly. Well, I have a sense of humor about it, because I can see it. Sometimes I know that person. I myself continue to be impressed, I should tell you, how good they are. I just have to say, credit where credit's due. They are really good at what they do.
That's taken you a lot of soul searching to come to a place to say that, Anneke, I would imagine.
Yes.
What about the feelings that you have towards yourself? How did you come to a place to accept yourself and to see yourself through the prism of an adult, that there isn't anything wrong with you, rather than the view that you had as a child that there was something inherently wrong?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that question, because the whole healing process is really one thing. It is to find back your innocence. And that's a tall order when you have been made to kill, when you have been raped and shamed, when you have been made complicit in horrible things. It's a tall order. But I think I had the seed from the caretaker in my early days, and then there was the near-death experience, which gave me the spiritual perspective. And then there was the first therapist she didn't know anything about this organized abuse, I should tell you. She was completely new to it, but she was open to me. And she became like the first mother figure where she could hold it. She could be the container for all of it. And she could reach me. And I didn't believe her when she would say that it wasn't my fault, that I was innocent. I didn't believe her, maybe, but since she kept repeating it, and every time I had a memory and worked through that memory, I come to my own innocence. The healing is the finding the innocence. You need the perspective of an adult, especially in the beginning, to reflect your innocence, to help you understand that it wasn't your fault, and to help you understand that there's these various forces at work that made you do that. And most survivors like myself, but the ones I work with, because I work with other people that have gone through the same kind of abuse, and there's many of us, and there's many people now that are remembering actually this kind of abuse, that I am a perfect mirror for them. That's to say, I know that I've been through it myself. I've been through the healing process myself, so I can guide them back to that, to understand all the forces at work that made them do that and think that about themselves. And of course, yes, my mother's insanity made me feel that I was wrong all the time, but it was not just her, it was coming from everywhere, all these different reflections, about me that are manipulated so well inside the network as well. Just to step out of all of it, it's a lifelong task, but it is possible.
Did you ever have the opportunity or give the opportunity to your mother to hear your side of the story?
Well, I called my mother in 2018, I believe, I just called her up after not speaking to her for 20 years, because with my mother it was, well, it's only going to be lies, and she's going to keep verbally attacking me anyway, and it's never, I did have an attempt when I had an attempt to communicate, which led nowhere, of course. I mean, it's not really something you can expect from someone who's gone that far into the, say, denial. And also, the more people do as adults, the more harm people cause as adults, the harder it is to come back from and acknowledge. So my mother had done a lot of harm, and she certainly wasn't ready to go anywhere near taking any responsibility. So I called her to forgive her in 2018, and there was a little openness in her then. She seemed surprised. So there was that moment. And then in 2019, she died.
You write a lot of articles online, and I'll finish on this. Part of your mission is to make society aware that it's shining a spotlight on the wrong heroes. Because you write in one article, just surviving daily life while trying to heal from child sexual abuse requires 1,000 times the strength it would require for someone without awareness to pursue a successful career. And yet society still values the career person over the survivor. What can we do as individuals to try to shift that?
Oh, thank you. Well, you're doing it now, and yes, there is that. Can we change? I feel that I've been public for 10 years, so the shift has been incredible and so gratifying to find more and more people interested and more and more people opening as the lies are becoming more obvious and more and more is revealed, from the dark side. More and more focus is placed on the survivors, and you're doing your share today with interviewing me, and people hearing it hopefully will go and look for other testimonies and realize that yes, there's these very, very strong people, many of them completely invisible, because of course it's not easy to come forward. There's a lot of pressure not to, but yes, to begin to learn to put our, to value that over the shiny platformed supposedly successful person.
If any of the content in this podcast has brought anything up for you, please reach out to your local, national or international helpline or speak to someone you trust.